In the summer of 2015, I was partway through my Master of Divinity degree, which is one of those traditional prerequisites to ordination in the United Church of Christ and the Unitarian Universalist Association, with which we are affiliated as a church. And as another requirement for ordination, to become a pastor, I was spending my summer doing full-time supervised chaplaincy work at a hospital in Madison, Wisconsin, along with a cohort of peers. And that summer, as we split up different units of the hospital, I served as the primary chaplain to one general floor, along with the neonatal intensive care unit, the NICU, and the psych unit, the inpatient for those dealing with serious mental health episodes. And so for 8 hours a day, I sat with folks going through some of the scariest, most disorienting, difficult days of their lives. And then in supervision, I reflected on how I responded in these situations. Where was I most comfortable offering care? Why did I respond in the ways that I did? Where was I least comfortable? What did all of this say about my own unhealed wounds? My own fears, my own needs? For instance, did I feel uncomfortable with the silence during that visit? Did I seek to fill it with words? Did I tend towards small talk rather than inviting the big, hard feelings or questions or conversations? Was I relieved when I didn't have to talk to people facing certain tragedies or struggles or situations? Why did I offer care? Why did I do what I do when I do it? That was the question we kept circling around. Where did it come from? What was beneath it? And I say all this to make the point that this was my awakening to the fact that a lot of what drives our actions for all of us, each of us, a lot of what drives us is subconscious, right? We're not aware of it. Scientists say something like potentially 98% of what we do is subconscious. For my own part, I began to face how subconsciously part of my journey to ministry, of ending up as a teenager or a 20-something who spent a good deal of my time listening to others share, that part of this, if I was being honest with myself, was a way of avoiding facing some of my own most difficult stuff. Subconsciously, I spent so much time inviting other people's feelings in so that I didn't have to deal with my own. That was a big realization. Wait, so I'm not just really empathetic? It was in the NICU and the psych ward that I learned there is a shadow side, as Father Richard Rohr mentioned earlier in that centering moment quote. There is a shadow side to this sort of superpower that I have. And each of us have these sort of superpowers. What is it you are really good at? People know you for. You're a really good listener. You're a really good talker. You're always serving others, almost as if you have no needs yourself. There's a shadow side to that for each of us. And that if I didn't learn to face my own stuff that was subconsciously driving me, at some point, it would begin to consume me and my closest relationships. And the other thing I was forced to face was that because of all of the feelings and memories and pain that I had pushed down, that I had repressed and never faced, all too often when I listened to other people share their stories, I projected my own stuff, my own unhealed stuff onto them. I could listen to their stories and fill in the blanks of what they were feeling, and I'd actually gotten pretty good at it. But while I thought, again, I was just a really good listener, really empathetic at hearing what they were saying, it turned out that I, again, was subconsciously projecting my own pain or my own shame, my own feelings onto them. And by putting it onto them, by feeling it through their stories, I once again subconsciously was keeping myself from having to face my own stuff. The field of psychology tells us that projection is a defense mechanism where we attribute our own unacceptable thoughts or feelings or motives to another person. Right? So projection is the student who didn't study for an exam blaming the teacher for failing to teach the material properly. It's someone who regularly gossips about others, who is hyper-focused on and regularly accusing others of doing the same while denying that they do it. Projection is someone constantly talking about and critiquing other people's looks, their hair, their status, their physique, their weight, their strength, their intellect, because they're insecure about their own. And so they hyper-focus on that in others as a way of deflecting off of themselves. You could say that whatever we tend to most focus on in others is a mirror to something that is unhealed within ourselves. Let me say that again. Whatever you tend to most focus on in others, notice and accuse them of, is a mirror to that which remains unhealed within yourself. But because facing it in ourselves is too much, too painful, too uncomfortable, it might make us too sad. Because we don't know what to do with it, we deny it, we repress it, and then we externalize it by focusing on how it shows up in others and sort of relieve ourselves from having to face it. This is the dynamic that I believe so often shows up as hypocrisy in our world. The Greek word hypokrites, from this morning's gospel reading, from which we get our word hypocrite, refers to a stage actor, which in ancient Greece literally wore a mask, right? Those who were not really themselves, but playing somebody else, hiding behind a mask. And so a hypocrite is, as the Gospel of Matthew says, giving, say, a large amount, but not for generosity's sake. Not because you're truly committed to the flourishing of others, but so that others will look at you and think, wow, what an amazing human. They're such a good person. Hypocrisy. You're wearing a mask. You're pretending to be something that is not what you are really doing. It is, as Matthew says, judging others harshly without reflecting on how we too have done or continue to do that very same thing. As a way of avoiding having to face how I too harbor prejudice or sexist thoughts or racism or homophobia or transphobia within my own heart and mind, even if I know better and I try not to consciously act on it. We can hyper-focus on how that shows up in others while failing to acknowledge and account for how it is still alive and at work within ourselves. And I believe, as I look out at the world around us, especially in this climate that we are living in, that it's part of what's at work in, say, mainstream medias or most of media's hyper-focus on the sensationalism, the absurdities, the sexism and racism, the abuse of power, and all the other isms and phobias that are embodied by President Donald Trump. Right, at this point, we have more than enough documented cases of all of that same stuff happening within those same media networks. But again, if they just constantly focus on Donald Trump, not only is it good for their money and ratings, we also don't have to face how we too are complicit in these things. And it spans the spectrum from right to left. I think that's part of what's at work in the Democratic Party's hyper-focus on Donald Trump. And so, as I've mentioned before, when a handful of protesters interrupt a rally for Vice President Kamala Harris a couple of weeks ago, for instance, her reaction says it all. As they put that mirror of the genocide in Gaza funded by the administration of which she is a part, not Republicans, not Donald Trump, but by her and President Biden and the Democratic establishment, when they hold that mirror up to her at a rally, a handful of protesters surrounded by thousands, she responds with that heavy tone, "You know what? If you want Donald Trump to win, then say that. Otherwise, I'm speaking." And the crowd went wild in support as the handful of folks were hauled away. That is, don't bring up genocide and our complicity in it, nearly $80 billion in U.S. weapons and military aid in 10 months, because that makes us look bad, and it will only help Donald Trump. Sure, we're committing a genocide, but complicit in genocide, but Donald Trump would be so much worse. We deflect, we project. And so instead of an honest reckoning with that paradox of complicity, while also claiming to be the party of morality, of social justice, of valuing the vulnerable, what we end up seeing is an authoritarian move to shut it down with the threat of a Donald Trump presidency. Projection and hypocrisy. Externalize. The protesters are the problem. They might cause me to lose. Again, not the fact that the Democrats are the ones complicit in this genocide. And I believe that's part of what's at work in many of our own hyper-focus on Donald Trump over the past decade. Which, don't get me wrong, Donald Trump and the movement behind him, especially the Christian right, and especially white Christian nationalism, poses a serious threat to democracy. I don't want to minimize that. We've talked about that around here, and we'll continue to talk about that around here. A threat to the most vulnerable and marginalized in our society, to global stability. But over the past decade, our focus on him has all too often served as a way of avoiding the racism and the sexism and the homophobia, our own desire for power and control, the way that we seek to exert that within our own spheres of influence, that we have within our own parties, our own churches, our own families. It's much easier to find someone out there who so embodies it that we don't have to look at ourselves. And so in 2015, as I began my own journey of reckoning with my own tendency to repress and project, to avoid having to face those shadows within myself out of shame that they existed, an ongoing journey that I continue to this day. In the midst of all of that, I came across an article whose title took my breath away. Looking at Trump and Seeing Ourselves, by the great spiritual activist, educator, author, and elder, Parker Palmer. And instead of simply making fun of Donald Trump, making it seem like he is somehow unique or himself the problem, that if we could just get rid of him, everything would be better. That instead of focusing all of our energies on him, Palmer challenged us, his readers, to consider how those very dynamics that he embodies are already at work in this country and within ourselves and our own communities in ways that we have all too quickly and for all too long denied. It's just a thing of the past. Can't we just let it go and move on? The great 20th century American literary sage and poet and prophet James Baldwin wrote, "Love takes off the masks that we fear we cannot live without, and know that we cannot live within." I use the word love here, he adds, in the tough and universal sense of quest and daring and growth. That is, true love calls us to stop projecting all that remains unhealed within ourselves and to begin a daring, courageous quest of facing it for the sake of our own healing and growth and transformation. As Baldwin elsewhere adds, not everything that is faced can be healed. but nothing can be healed that is not faced. Nothing can be healed that is not faced. And so I wonder, what if instead of being among those who simply point our fingers at others, Donald Trump or whoever it is that we think embodies evil, that party, those people, whoever it is, for their intolerance, for their lack of moral conviction or courage and so on, and thereby fail to face how it shows up in our own lives? What if we became those who took seriously this call of daring growth and transformation that Baldwin invites us to develop enough trust with one another to be vulnerable as we gather, as we talk, to do the work of healing within ourselves, and only as we do that, only inasmuch as we are committed to that journey for ourselves and for our families, our church, to then likewise point out the forces at work in our world, disfiguring and destroying our communities. It's not that we don't be engaged in that work, but that we cannot do that without first and simultaneously doing that work within ourselves. Otherwise, it's hypocrisy. As Jesus says, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly enough to take the speck out of your neighbor's. If we cannot do that, if we cannot take off our masks, be honest, be vulnerable, share in real ways, then we are merely proving ourselves to be wounded hypocrites, well-intentioned perhaps, but self-righteous nonetheless. Pointing out that others might be worse does not excuse us from our own work. And to do our own work doesn't mean that others don't also have to do their work. It's not a zero-sum game. And if we can do this, if we can build a community here that helps one another take off those masks so that we can bit by bit stop projecting and we can actually heal and grow, then we have some profoundly good news to offer this world. We have a way of love that I know people are searching for, seeking out, longing for, if only there was a place they could trust that it actually was happening. A way of love that alone can take us beyond the toxic and destructive cycles that we're stuck in. So that's my prayer. As we move into continued heated days ahead, as we seek truth and love and putting that into action in some uncomfortable ways. That is my prayer for you as individuals, for us as a church, for the witness that we might offer this wider community. Friends, may it be so. For your healing, for the healing of our democracy, for the healing of all the world. Amen.